Welcome to the Centre for Legal Innovations webinar series. We're delighted to have Verity White, Legal Counsel and Automation Coach from Telstra here today, and she's going to present for us on redesigning contracts for readability, usability and trust. And fabulous to have you all here, and now over to Verity.
Thanks so much. Thanks. It's wonderful to be here for College of Law and Centre of Legal Innovation, and even better, getting to talk about one of my favourite subjects, which is redesigning contracts. So I'm Verity White. I'm a legal counsel and automation coach with Telstra, a telecommunications company in Australia, and I absolutely love contract design. Here is a shot of me with some very excited participants at a contract redesign workshop. It's a lot of fun to redesign contracts, but there's a lot that goes into it. And if you're new to contract redesign, or if you've done a little bit before, or even if you're quite advanced at contract redesign, it can be pretty overwhelming to start with. So what I'm hoping to give you today is a bit of inspiration and motivation to get stuck into trying some contract design or redesign, but also some really practical, usable templates and tips and ways of thinking about contract design so that you can make your contracts beautiful and really usable and readable and trustworthy. So when we think about contract design, it's very similar to a buffet breakfast table at a hotel. So if you're like me, when I'm lucky enough to stay at a hotel and then there's that beautiful breakfast buffet spread in the morning, I really like going up there and piling my plate high with everything. And then I come back to try and eat it all, and eventually I either get a very sore tummy or I can't finish it. And when you're looking at doing some contract design, it's very similar to the breakfast buffet. There's a lot to choose from. It can be quite overwhelming, and it doesn't always taste good if you have it all at once. You can end up feeling quite full and overwhelmed. So here's our contract design buffet. And the way that I've kind of sorted this diagram is to show from, so on the screen from right to left in the direction of the arrows, easier to harder, or more things that you can do by yourself versus things that you might need to get more integration and collaboration from across your organisation. So the good news is, if you have changed the font on a contract, then congratulations, you are already a contract designer. You're a legal designer, because changing the font is one way to improve the formatting for yourself or for contract users. You might use in a contract redesign project a little bit from one or two areas. You might have something from everywhere, or for a really intense, deep project, you might be going all out on every single aspect of each of these from the contract design buffet. But it's a really interesting way to try and structure your contract design project if you have a look at which area you want to play in to start with, and it helps to focus what you're going to really do with your contract design project. So this is just a little bit of an overview on the different elements that go into contract design. And I want you to not feel bad at all if you don't do any of some sections of the buffet. You don't have to do them all at once. So one of the things that we need to remember is contract design is not necessarily easy. It's actually quite difficult as a lawyer or as anyone trying to do something different. It takes a bit of courage. So really encourage you to be brave throughout this process of contract design, and really remember that it's easy to make things more complex, and it takes a really passionate person to go the other way and to simplify things. So good on you for trying. But what does it matter? Like, why does it even matter if we have contracts that people can't read or use? I think that readability is really important, because it is one of the ways that points to whether or not you can actually use that document. And if you can't use a contract, and if you can't understand, read, use a contract, then you don't trust the company or the organisation or the person that put that document in front of you. So trust is something that a lot of different organisations are studying more and more closely in a whole bunch of different areas. So here we've got some research that focused on trust as against GDP per capita. And so what we can see here, we've got Norway right up the top there, very high GDP, and then also really high trust factors. And there's Australia down there, kind of in the middle, which is kind of an interesting, you know, not necessarily causal relationship, but interesting kind of interaction between trust and GDP and how people within those countries feel that others can be trusted. And Colombia right down the bottom there. Trust has been shown to have a really big impact on organisations, and with employees reporting, you know, less sick days, 76% more engagement in businesses where employees feel that there's a sense of trust. Less stress, wouldn't that be nice? You know, less stress and more energy at work. Amazing impacts of trust within business. And lawyers, if there are lawyers on the phone, we need all the help we can get when it comes to trust. We're often ranking right down the bottom of trusted professions. Thankfully, we're just above car salespeople, which is nice, but we really want to be moving ourselves up that list a bit. Now, you cannot have a legal innovation webinar or presentation at a conference without mentioning Richard Susskind, and this is one of my favourites. When there is opacity and mystification, there is mistrust and a lack of accountability, and that's what you get when you've got contracts that you can't actually read, that are almost deliberately trying to confuse people. Another great reason to bother with contract redesign is because it's a great time to learn new skills as a legal professional, because there are so many different applications, different organisation types that are nipping at the heels of lawyers, and we need to build up our bank of skills to be able to better service clients going forward. And again, if you have a really clear way of describing the contractual obligations, you can use that as a competitive advantage within your law firm, within your organisation. It's actually a really amazing point of differentiation if you've got really clear, well-designed, beautifully presented contracts. So when it comes to contract redesign, there's actually a few different ways that you can think about it. So I used to take on all of these mindsets in a haphazard way, but I've moved towards taking a more systematic approach towards them. You need to get philosophical, you need to get academic, scientific, and physical, and we'll run through those today. So let's start by getting philosophical. Now, the philosophical question, the obvious one, is what is a contract? So I don't think that's actually the most interesting question. I think the interesting question is what a contract is not. And a contract is no longer just a bit of paper. We have to think digitally about contracts. We live in a world that's digital. We live in a world where so many transactions and businesses aren't even based on paper. Everything happens online. So we need to stop thinking, and this is personally really hard for me. I keep thinking about documents in that A4 paper-based format. So we have to start thinking about digital contracts, digital relationships as a philosophical mindset. Then one of the other key philosophical questions about contracts is to think about what is the purpose of a contract? What is its actual reason for waking up in the morning? Now, a contract can have more than one purpose at one time. It could be trying to lock down specific rights and obligations. Maybe it's trying to achieve a specific goal, and those purposes might change over time. What we need to think about, though, each time we're trying to redesign a contract is to get really clear on what that specific purpose is for that contract and whether or not our contract is achieving those purposes. So luckily for us, so we don't have to do all the work, the very clever people at the International Association of Commercial and Contract Management did some research on the purpose of a contract with their membership base. And what you're seeing up on the screen here is the way that that particular membership base stack ranked in order of importance the different types of purposes that a contract might have within their organisation. So not unexpectedly, we've got record of rights, responsibilities and obligations right up the top there. Now, consider whether or not if this same survey was done with CEOs or financial or CFOs, financially minded people, you might see number 10 there, instruments for generating financial benefit, a lot higher up the list. And for your specific contract that you might have in mind, you might have a greater importance on demonstrating brand and corporate values. And for the example that I'll show you a little bit later on, that was one of the key values that we wanted to, well, the key purposes that we wanted for our contract redesign. We really wanted to push the corporate values to the front and make sure that our document reflected our corporate values. So when you think about a purpose, if you've got a purpose for a contract, that's almost like its KPI, its key performance indicator. Are you meeting this purpose as a contract? And in the same study, the research identified that these particular highlighted purposes weren't actually being achieved by the contracts. So imagine if you have a contract and the main purpose of that contract is to manage risk. So if you've got a contract that you're trying to use as a way to manage risk within your organisation, and yet that contract is not fulfilling that purpose, then it's time for you to have a step back, think about how you can redesign your contract so that it can better meet that purpose or actually meet that purpose. So one of the ways to start to think about your contract redesign is in terms of the purpose of the contract. So now that we've got a purpose of a contract, we need to think about the purpose of our project. So we're setting up a contract redesign project, and from there, we're going to want to think about why are we redesigning this contract? What is the underlying purpose for the project? What are we trying to achieve? And one of the key ways to think about that is to imagine how you want to report back to your team, to your CEO, or to anyone within the organisation on what you achieved at the end of your contract redesign project. So if you're standing up there, you've got the big slide behind you, it's like we finished our contract redesign project and we achieved what? That it can be the purpose and the driving mission behind your actual project, which will help to keep you focused on those outcomes and making sure that the project is working towards that as an outcome. This is one of my favourite philosophical kind of ponderings about contracts. Imagine if everyone who is currently drafting contracts or in the future wants to draft a contract starts deliberately trying to make these contracts look and feel good, and so that everyone can read, understand and use them. And I think that is an amazing thing that we can all work to try and achieve if everyone's working towards that purpose or that philosophical push towards writing really readable, usable, understandable contracts. I think we could definitely have an impact on the way that business is done. Another key thing is what's wrong with your contracts. That can be a real way to drive the purpose of a project. Now, if you have a chance in the chat questions, the Q&A section, feel free to climb in there and answer this question yourself. What is wrong with your contracts? I'm really interested to know if there's anything within your contracts, if you've got any questions about contracts, or if you had a magic contract redesign wand, what is it that you would change about contracts? So feel free to go to the Q&A section within the webinar and plop in what it is that you would change about contracts. All right, so we've been philosophical. It's time for us to get academic. We're going to get academic in our approach to contract redesign. So processing fluency is a key concept when it comes to being looking at different ways of redesigning contracts. So processing fluency, here's the example there. If something is easy to read, it's seen as easy to do. And the opposite, if it's hard to read, it's hard to do. So processing fluency is all about how easy or difficult something is for us to process cognitively, or lots of different ways. So some of the other academic research that's gone into information processing and the way that words and information is presented. Again, this is one of my favourite titles of research ever. Consequences of erudite vernacular utilised irrespective of necessity, or problems using long words needlessly. What a great title. So this particular study showed that people think that you're less intelligent if you've got more complex text. So something to keep in mind when you're drafting legal information and contractual documents. A few more bits and pieces from the world of academia. People work better together with clear and simple information. It's a lot easier to work with people when they're giving you contractual information or information about contracts in a clear and simple way. When one study into clinical guidelines and giving medical information using plain language showed that the people who were given that in an easy to read format actually felt much more positively towards it and were more likely to comply with those recommendations. Wouldn't that be amazing if you could give people a contract in a clear, readable format? That means they're more likely to comply with the terms in those contracts, potentially. And again, easy equals true. When statements are easy to read, people, our brains, it's a cognitive bias that they seem more truthful. So that is, again, a competitive advantage that we can, harness for our contractual purposes. And hopefully this isn't news to everybody. I'm pretty sure everyone hopefully knows that people do not like legalese. This is a great study by Christopher Trudeau into plain language. People clearly prefer the plain language version to the legalese. But what really kind of was impactful for me about this study was that 40% of clients stopped reading legal information and legal advice out of frustration. And this, to me, is where I think plain language, information design, contractual design will really start moving towards an ethical issue as we move into an age of responsible business, and lawyers themselves in most states and territories have an ethical obligation of clear communication within their practicing rules, and there's also the duty to act in the best interests of your client. I think that if you're providing legal advice, which clients, 40% of it, which clients aren't reading, are you actually giving legal advice? And to what extent are you meeting your ethical obligations if you're providing contractual documents which aren't readable or useful? Something to think about. So when we're thinking about drafting contracts, it's not more is better. It's a failure of this contract design if we're just cluttering and confusing clients and contract users. We want to be really clear. And that's what the academic literature is showing us. So now we've been academic, it's time to get scientific. Now, before there was actually any lean or agile, there was the scientific method. Now, anyone can be a scientist. You just need a white lab coat, right? But it's a bit more than that. So getting scientific is having that hypothesis, thinking up an experiment, testing it. And often with contracts, I was often really overwhelmed by the concept of trying to run user testing on a contract, trying to figure out different ways that I could test contract redesign before and after. It's quite daunting. You have to try and identify who the users are. Are you focusing on legal lawyer users? Are you talking about internal, within your organization? As an in-house lawyer, are you thinking about internal clients? Are you thinking about the end customer? Are you thinking about all these different, the regulator, or who is your contract user? There's so often so many users. So it can be quite daunting. And then because you've got that testing, you have to do it twice because you've got to do the contract before and the contract after. So I really struggled to try and figure out the best way to test contract design projects. So I came up with some very lazy poolside test methods. So I call these poolside test methods because you can do them by the pool. All you need is a laptop and a bit of internet, and then you can optionally have a cocktail or a mocktail with you whilst you do these poolside test methods. So the three that I'm going to talk about today are calculators, lazy metrics, and benchmarking. So the calculators are a great way for you to start taking some control over the actual documents that you're using and the legal information that you have. Hemingway app is a great online resource that's very visual, especially with the colors and whatnot that it uses, which you might want to use to try out specific contract clauses and see how readable they are from that really small point of view. Again, a readability test tool, if you've got online contracts, this is a really interesting one that you can test the readability of content that your organisation might have online, say your privacy policy, and you can test the details of that via that tool. And the rewrite for change calculator. So when this pack is distributed, all the URL links will be in there and you can click on those. Let's dive in a bit deeper to the rewrite calculator. So Rewrite is a wonderful plain language and training organisation in New Zealand, and they've done this calculator which you can go into online and try out for yourself. But the way that this is structured is for you to test, or as an estimate, how much time and therefore money are you wasting on rewriting or correcting unclear communications. And if you think about the number of communications that go back and forth with a contract that needs clarification then, or a contract when things go wrong, there's quite a few back and forth communications. So in this particular example I've put in, it ends up being pretty extensive. If you're looking at 2,000 employees and they each send around 30 emails per day, 7% of those need clarification at 15 minutes each, and they're all on $40 an hour, and it kind of really stacks up over the time. It's quite a lot of money. So put in those numbers for your organisation or your team and have a think about whether or not you can use those kinds of metrics as a way of getting a bit more impetus and motivation for a contract redesign project. So another really easy way for you to do some basic testing is with readability statistics, which are in Microsoft Word, or they're in lots of other Word programs, or word processing programs. So they aren't the be-all and end-all, and they're not going to tell you lots of things. They're not going, it might give you a readability score, but it might not actually tell you whether or not your clients or the contract users can actually use that contract in real life. But it is a way of getting a sense of where the wind's blowing for your contract, and you can compare contracts over time quite quickly to see whether or not your improvements and redesigns are having an impact on some of these basic metrics. So the key ones to look at are the number of words, the words per sentence, the grade level, and the passive sentences. So what do each of these metrics actually mean? Why are we bothering to collect these? So you might have your own metrics that you might want to collect about your documents. This is the reason why I collect them. When you're looking at word count, this is an indicator of how long a document would take to read. So a contract, it's how long is a piece of string is how long a contract is, but depending on how long do you want your contract users to spend reading this contract or this particular section of a contract, and then you can divide that kind of reading time by the number of words per minute that you read at. I like to use 200 words per minute, but you might want to test that and see whether or not that's reasonable. And from there, you can determine, actually, I want to have this long of a reading time, or however long that you want the contract to be based on that word count and the reading time. And again, pages, shorter is better, but if you've got like 2 pages and lots of words, then you're squashing everything in. Again, not really readable. So keep track of the page count. But again, that is also keeping us hemmed in to an A4 concept. You might want to scrap the page count and just work towards readability, for example. Passive sentences make it confusing for readers to understand who's doing what, especially in contracts. So there's lots of examples of ways that you can turn those into active contracts, active sentences. And again, readability, as I mentioned, it's not the be-all and end-all. You still need to do some other testing, but it's a good way to get started on seeing how readable your contract is, and grade level 9 is the one you should generally be aiming for as universally readable. So we've got our metrics, which is great, but what do we actually do with them now? So one thing that is really great to do is you become a detective and you have a look around on the internet and see if you can find other competitors or friends within a similar organisation or within similar size industry, colleagues, and seeing how your contract stacks up against others within the same industry or within the same size. And so here's an example of one that we did at Telstra for a particular redesign project. And we had a look and like, we're not actually doing that good here. Maybe this company X and Y are a bit smaller, and maybe company Z is the one that we really should be measuring against, but we don't really want to be just average when it comes to this. We want to really push and try and improve our contracts to be the best in category if possible. So that was a really good way to show, especially within the business, and often when people see that, it instinctively makes them want to get competitive and beat the competition. So that's always a nice way to, again, build some motivation around a contract design project and judge your, give yourself that benchmark to see how are we doing in comparison to others within our industry. So user testing, it's really, really important. It's difficult, but one of the easiest ways to do it is to just ask people what they think about a contract. I would give you a warning to beware if you have heard it's maybe controversial whether or not this quote was actually from Henry Ford, but he did say that if I had have asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So when people ask, if you ask your contract users, what do you want from a contract, they'll often say, I want it to be shorter, which is fine, but yeah, we can make it shorter. We can make the font tiny and squish it up onto 3 pages. Is that going to solve the problems? Probably not. So keep that in mind, but don't let it stop you. Go out and ask people for what they think of the contracts within your organisation or within your law firm. So this is an example of just some of the contract feedback we got when we asked for input from clients and other lawyers and things like that. So you get some really interesting insights, and it's not that hard to do this kind of basic user testing. We just ask people, what do you think of our contracts at the moment? And what happened afterwards? Well, you'll just have to wait till the end of the webinar to find out what happened. So the other cool thing to do when it comes to contract redesign is to look at the different types of options that are available for designing your contracts differently. And one of my favorites is contract visualization. So this is from Stefania Passera, who is, along with Helena Harpier, who had the quote up from before, is an amazing, like one of the leaders in the field of contract design, the leaders in the field of contract design. And this is some of the amazing research that Stefania has done into how contract visualization can help improve user experience and whether or not they're liking it more or feeling less stressed about reading contracts based on that research compared to the text-based contracts. So more positive emotions and less negative ones. Wouldn't that be great for us to have when we hand over a contract for someone to read? The other key impact of visual contracting is around actually getting things right. People are more likely to be accurate when they're using a visual contract versus a text-only contract, and they do it faster. So when they are trying to find the answer to a contract question using a visual contract versus a text-based contract, it's faster with a visual contract. And this is universal across people who are from English as a second language to highly educated people and judges. Everyone performs better with a visual contract, no matter who you are. So for example, some examples of visual contracting that you might have seen previously. This is a fruit picking contract from South Africa by Robert DeRuy. And an amazing comic book contract. What a great example of solving a problem that took often the training for the team members who were doing the fruit picking took a long time. There was some English language barriers and some readability issues with the previous text-based contracts. And this was amazing. It's really cut down the training time. And more importantly, I think the employees actually feel a lot more positive about the contract. They feel like they actually understand what their employer wants from them now. So it had really positive results from the employees as well. And a little closer to home, the amazing Oricon engineering group has this beautiful contract, comic book contract that all employees see when they sign up with Oricon. Now, the amazing Professor Camilla Anderson has just made this available online. The entire contract is available online. If you search Oricon comic book contract, you should be able to find it. If not, just let me know and I'll pinpoint you the link. You can have a look over this. It's incredible, and the detail that's gone into it is just phenomenal. So, fantastic example of using visuals in a contract for a specific purpose, and really it's got some amazing results as well in terms of positive impacts with employees and how they feel about the organisation and how they understand the different bits and pieces that are expected of them now. And so you might be thinking, oh, that's all fine and well and good, but I've got a big business contract and I can't be putting pictures of penguins in front of my customers, or I can't be doing that kind of, visual contracting. That's fine for consumer contracts, but it's not good for business to business contracts. Well, have a look at this fantastic Shell B2B contract, which has got visual diagrams in it, which is an amazing way to display where the risk and title passes when they're delivering, in this case, it's oil. So we've got it in the tanker, we're going to plug it into the ship and do whatever. And here is where the pass off of risk is. We've got the risk, you've got the risk. A really great example. And you can see on the right-hand side there that there's also some flowcharts, which are another great way. We'll talk a bit more about flowcharts in a moment, and a timeline. So some really amazing elements there. And if you think back to the contract design buffet, we've got some flowcharts, we've got some timelines, but behind that is the plain language and the information design that goes into the contract to start with before you move to the visual contracting. So all of this has got me really excited, and I've started to think about how can I build a test? How can I start to figure out this way of doing some contract redesign? And I came up with a scientific-ish method of doing some testing. My hypothesis was that contract design could have a really big effect on brand perception and deal velocity, as well as internal efficiency. And so this was my scientific hypothesis that I wanted to test. So we built out some scientific testing, which was quite, there was a few challenges involved because it's a confidential internal document. I can't just run up to anyone on the street and say, hey, can you read this contract and let me test you on it? So had to test the test first and get the test right, define the right participants. Telstra itself was going through a lot of changes. The redesign project was actually so successful, I got pulled onto another redesign project. We had lots of feedback that came from different stakeholders, so that was quite difficult to take in and digest and work on. So we had lots and lots going on at the time. But it was a really great learning experience for us, and we're doing more redesign based on some of our early results from that testing. So some of the key things that we wanted to test were the basics of speed of comprehension and accuracy, and by doing specific tasks within the contract. We also wanted to test that how well these contracts were seen as fulfilling key purposes that we talked about earlier. So one of those being the brand and corporate values. We wanted to see what people thought of the contract before and the contract after as it relates to that purpose of supporting brand and corporate values. We also wanted to get that first impression. We wanted people to see what they thought of the front page. Really important in terms of the testing was for us to observe the testing. We didn't want to just send out a survey. We wanted to be in the room watching people interact with the document. We gave them the option to do it to work with the contract online or as a paper-based form, because that's how the contract was actually designed. And being able to watch people use the contract gave us some really interesting insights. For example, we asked people to find definitions we found that lots of people would go straight to the back. They would look for definitions at the back end of the document. And so that gave us a real insight on, well, if people are looking at the back for definitions or for like a glossary, then maybe that's where we should be making a note as our design team to always put those definitions there. So now it's time for us to get physical and move into that physical mindset, which is basically one of the most important ones, actually doing the contract redesign. So an amazing way to get started in contract redesign is to have a look at the TACCM Contract Design Pattern Library, which is an amazing resource that steps through, it's only been released, I think it's only came out this year. So it's an amazing way for you to kickstart your contract redesign projects with something specific that you can take from that contract redesign pattern library and use it within your project. So 2 examples up here, we've got conversational style and FAQ headings. These are 2 design patterns from the TACCM Design Pattern Library. So the example that we've got here is we have a background section under many clauses within this particular contract, and even though we've made it clear at the start of the contract that these aren't legally binding, they're just informative, we think that it's a lot nicer to have these within our agreement, because it's just us kind of being there and saying, hey, by the way, this is what this particular clause is about. And the language that we're using is a lot of you and we, you and us, so that way it's not like Telstra and customer or Telstra and dealer. So a deliberate style of drafting. And FAQ headings is a really interesting way to, it's almost like you're turning your contract into that FAQ that makes you really focus on what users of the contract want to do under the contract, which is a really great frame of mind to be in. What can I use confidential information for? Only for what the purposes are of this agreement. So it makes it quite clear on, with the subject of the clause and how you're speaking to the users of the contract. So here's an example of our front page redesign. It's actually turned from 2 pages into 1. And this was done, I think it's like a year and a half, maybe more now. But we really wanted that front page to be very different. We wanted to have that different look and feel. We wanted it to be more engaging. We wanted to show how we'd structured the document. We'd taken all the pieces of the contract and done a real restructuring. We wanted to make it clear where things were under the document. We also needed this contract to work online in a digital form, but also we knew that a lot of the users of the contract would be printing the contract out. And so we wanted it to work for both. And again, we put the signatures up front because apparently, scientifically, there is something in our brains that makes us read the contract more if we're signing on the front page as opposed to the back page. But also, one of the key questions that we have often around contracts is whether or not a document is signed. And so we wanted to make it really easy to be able to tell whether or not a contract is signed. Obviously, if your contract's confidential or if you want to have some kind of different front page, it's up to you, but this was just the way that we were keen to set our contract up to make it much more engaging from that front page, from that first impression. So really a bit of a breakdown on some practical things that you can try for a contract redesign. Tables are an amazing way to structure information within contracts, not only for just for definitions, which is the example that we've got here, but also in lots of different circumstances. So one of the reasons why I love using tables specifically for definitions is that you can then sort the tables really easily. You can leave a square blank, and then if you're looking to automate that contract, you can use meta tags and fill in that definition later. It's really easy to scan. It's really easy to update, and it just really helps structure your brain to see the information and find the definitions quite quickly, which can get kind of overwhelming if you've got them all squashed up into just a separate line. So, and that's a really easy contract design element to try. Now, my other favourite clause is the poor notice clause at the back of the contract. So this is often stuck at the back in the boilerplate section, and it's a real canary in the mine for contract redesign. So if you have a look here on that under the before page and at item number 3, there's a word there, facsimile. So that is your canary in the mine for contract redesign. If you are seeing the word fax or facsimile in your agreement, you know that it's probably a little bit old. Most organisations, apart from maybe medical organisations, don't use fax machines anymore. So have a look at your clause, your notice clauses, and see whether or not there's fax mentioned, and maybe it's time for a bit of an overhaul. So you can see the after side there on the right, we've used the table, we've used some emojis. I love sneaking an emoji into a contract wherever possible, which is just really helpful for scanning. And so you might be thinking, notice clauses, whatever, they're not really that important, but it can be quite important, and it's also a great way to break up a kind of boring back-end piece of the document, which is often, as I said, boilerplate. So it gives a bit of visual interest, breaks things up, and makes it easier to read. And again, back to processing fluency, if it's easy to read, it must be true. So it's going to be an easier read for your contract users and easier for them to locate information, and also adds to that overall likability. So now let's see what happened in real life. So here's our benchmarking again before that we did. Telstra has got a bit of red there in the columns. Now having a look, we actually shifted some of that red and really had some massive improvements that we were quite proud of. We actually reduced the words by 25%, and that making it 25% faster to read. We got our readability level down from degree level to high school, which we're really happy about, and reducing those passive sentences as well. Now, there's lots that go into this particular document, so we don't think this is done. This is obviously going to be an evolving project where we'll rework and try to improve on these, but we're really happy with that as progress to start with, especially to be able to reduce a lot of those pages, reduce the words per sentence, making things easier to read overall. But of course, what does it matter if people don't actually agree with the Poolside metrics? So we still went out and wanted to have a chat to people and see what they thought about the contract afterwards. So we got some really great feedback. Some people thought, oh, it's, you know, it just feels easy, which was some of the best feedback that we got, and that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted things to feel easier. People saying it has more clarity than the older version, which is excellent. And also you can get some negative feedback as well. Or it's still a bit of a prototype, or it's too blocky, different kind of, you will get different feedback when you go and ask for it, but that's what it's all about. You can take some on board or ignore others. So, oh, and the other really exciting thing is that that contract was actually a finalist in the 2019 Communication Awards, which was really, really exciting. We didn't win, but that's okay. It was just really exciting to be recognised by such industry experts. So we're really proud of that. Now, if you are wanting to get into some redesign and using some visual elements, I think process clauses are the gateway drugs to contract redesign. So here you can see an acceptance process that's quite long, difficult, hard to read, and if you're wanting to actually understand where you're at, it's quite hard. So here's our redesigned process clause in a flowchart format. So obviously we'd prefer to simplify the process if we could, go back to it and simplify it. But when you're kind of stuck with a clause, but you maybe within your organisation need to explain that clause, putting it into a diagram can be a really usable and shareable way of giving legal advice and providing legal business training. Another example of a process chart or scope change. This is a scope change process chart. And what you can actually do that's really cool is you step out each of the items that you need to do to follow the particular contractual clause. And then you can link that to a template that would actually give you the pre-approved letter or template for that particular action within that clause. So kind of an interesting, different way of giving legal information or explaining legal outcomes from a particular clause. So going from clause to process to action is really exciting, I think. Now, template. Here's another template, which is responsibility Swimlanes. So this is another element from the TACCM Design Pattern Library, and this is this template and the other process chart process templates are available for download as well. So this is really a great way of showing, here's your obligation, here's my obligation, here's one that we're both responsible for. So just different ways of representing different information. So I encourage you to keep in mind this mindset, the philosophical mindset of creating contracts that everyone can read and understand and use. Some of the other things that I'm philosophically thinking about is the concept of a contract scorecard. Could you start to look at readability, usability, and velocity as a way to, give a score, or a grade level for a contract? And then if you benchmark all contracts within your organization, you can target anything that's below a B for redesign. So that's one way to look at classifying different kinds of information within your organization. And the other thing that I'm really excited about is the contract design canvas. So I actually designed this canvas to work with those different mindsets. So philosophical, academic, scientific, and physical, and then of course some key project details as a way for anyone who's running a contract design project to kind of get all of your crazy thoughts, not crazy, but exciting and ambitious thoughts about contract redesign onto one page. And it's going to really help you to explain your project to other people and get them involved. So when we are thinking about that contract design overall, each step is really important, obviously, but you don't want to spend too much time thinking about what you should do or researching contracts. That is the should zone. We want to be in the doing zone. We want to be testing. We want to be physically redrafting. We want to be in that doing zone, being scientific, being physical. So I encourage everyone to redesign for readability, usability, and you'll get that trust within your contracts and organizations. And if you're really keen to find out more, you can Google visual contracts, comic contracts, legal design, plain language, information engineering, all really great things to Google. Have a check out of that Rewrite for Change calculator. Stefania Pacera's got a great doctoral defense there, the Beyond the Wall of Contract Text, which is amazing in terms of looking at structuring design projects. Some lawyers from Airbus did the Innovation Matrix there, which is a really visual book on innovation and IP, if you're in that area, and how you can structure contracts to protect or to share IP. And if you're interested in contract design for automation, there's my book on Secrets of Productive Contracts. So remember that you're already a legal designer, and if you aren't happy with your contracts, you can change them, which is, I really encourage everyone to try and change and redesign contracts as much as they can.
So a huge thank you to all of you who have attended today. As you know, the Centre for Legal Innovation is very much focused on these types of webinars, this type of information sharing, collaboration and experience exchange. So please follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter or Facebook so that you can receive information about our upcoming events. And we look forward to welcoming you back to one of our events, and thank you again very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and feel free to reach out if you want to talk contracts on LinkedIn, or you can email me or find me, and there's some other templates that I mentioned there are available for download, so you can contact myself or College of Law and we'll get them to you somehow.